So I've got a question for you. Do you have a location that comes to mind when I talk about the fact that other people out there that pitch it to you all the time as if they're like the travel agent that's trying to get you to go? They tell you about all the great pictures that you're gonna take, and you sit there a little bit like, well, yeah, I am going to go, but probably not this year, maybe next year. Well, for me, Venice has been that location, as the title suggests. And as somebody who lives in the UK and occasionally fights off that imposter syndrome and calls himself a photographer, it's pretty ridiculous that I've never been. So today's video, I'm going to share all the photos and videos from the trip, and honestly, I am so excited to share them with you. I think this is maybe some of my best photos I've ever taken. What up on the screen now is a little bit of an appetizer, so let's get into it. If you've been living under a rock somewhere and you've never heard of Venice, it can be found in the northeast corner of Italy off the coast. And if you have a look at it on the map, there is literally just a single road and train track that links it to Italy. And when that road and train track hits Venice, it literally ends. There is no cars or trains or any traffic to be found in Venice. But sadly, Venice is actually sinking. Like, no, really sinking. You may have seen headlines like this from Venice recently, because over the last 100 years, it's thought that Venice might have actually sunk by 9 inches. So there might genuinely be a time limit on how long there is until you can't visit Venice no more. But from a photography point of view, it is also absolutely stunning, and it looks like this. But if we rewind 24 hours, I was stressing. I was going through that like photographer pre-trip stress. Do you know what I was stressing about? What gear to take. I'm sure we've all been there, so let's quickly talk gear. So if you don't care about gear, then jump to here, but for the rest of you guys, I took the Fujifilm X-H2S as my main camera. I haven't bought the primes that I want to buy yet, so I ended up taking the 16 to 55mm f2.8 Fuji zoom, big heavy combinations, so it made me want to take something a little bit on the lighter side as well, so I took the M10 and the 35mm Summilux. Now, I can sense that some of you are reaching towards your keyboards to tell me all about the X100V, but I do have a bit of a confession, and that's that it's been stolen, like stolen away from me so I couldn't use it for the whole trip, by my girlfriend Claire. She used it throughout the whole trip, really enjoyed using it, some of her pictures up on the screen now. But importantly, this is my channel, so enough of that, and back to Venice. So let's kick this off with the main attractions, and are they worth seeing or should you just avoid them? I do think in Venice they're just too good to miss. Even if you've seen the pictures all over Instagram before, go and get your own. Now when it comes to bridges, there's only a few bridges that go over the Grand Canal. One of them that we were right next to was Rialta Bridge. It's absolutely stunning, but during the day it is absolutely cram-packed because it's a bit of a tourist hub and transport hub in this location. But during the morning, and not even that early, at 8 AM, it looked like this. So definitely get yourself up and out of bed early. Another bridge that's definitely worth seeing is Academia Bridge. From the bridge itself, you get these really good views down towards the Basilica. This was probably my favourite spot when it came to photos. We came here during the morning and in the evening. I do think the sunset pictures would have been the better ones, but we had pretty cloudy evenings, and you can frame up some boats in the foreground to make the pictures even better. Again, super busy during the day. Away from bridges and on to probably the main attraction, and that is St. Mark's Square. And to be honest with you, I was a little bit disappointed by St. Mark's Square. It's super busy during the day, but even on the morning that we got up early, there's just so much scaffolding and like equipment just left around that it made taking photos pretty hard, and I found it just uninspiring. However, if you walk just round the corner from Marks Square to like the seafront, this is where I got some of my favourite images, like that one I teased you with at the start. Next up then, for us, probably the highlight of the trip. It was probably my favourite bit, and that was a day trip we took to the islands of Murano and Burano. Now, if you've never been or you've never heard of them, Murano is a place that is very, very well known for its glass. On our little tour that we took, we watched a master at work, and just watching this guy craft this horse out of some molten glass was incredible. It took him less than like 30 seconds, and you can definitely appreciate how much time and effort has gone into this guy's learning. But from a photography point of view, the island that we really want to go to is Burano. Now, in black and white, doesn't look all that interesting, but in colour, look at these buildings. Now, the myth that surrounds this place is that fishermen struggle to find their homes in the mist, so they painted them these ridiculous colours, and that's how we've ended up with a little village that looks like this. Now, I actually found this to be the highlight of the trip, but be careful if you book a tour like we did. We did not spend enough time in Burano to really experience it, so try and book a tour that spends a good few hours here. For the 5 minutes that you've not got your camera out and it's in your bag and you fancy doing something a bit more touristy, away from photography-based things, then I recommend that you do Doge Palace. We love Doge Palace. I have I've never seen paintings of this scale with this much detail. I have no idea how someone sets out to paint this stuff with the most ridiculous perspectives of some of these paintings. The history there was also awesome, and it gives you a little tour around the prison that was there, and it gives you a little bit more information about the Bridge of Sighs. Another place that we enjoyed was the bell tower that we did on our final day. This is one of the few places where you can get a proper panoramic view of Venice. When we was up there, the weather was miserable. We had a full-on storm on our final day, but definitely worth the little trip up. Whilst you're also in Venice, food-wise, you have to try cicchetti. I don't care if you're not into food, it's like these little slices of baguette with things like meat, fish, cheese on top of them, and they go down really well with an Aperol Spritz or a beer. When it comes to beer is so expensive in Venice. It was like €8 a pint. And when I say a pint, I don't mean a pint because they skimp you out of that as well. It's like a 400ml medium, not a pint. So definitely watch out if you're a beer lover. Venice is not the place to go if you're looking for good value for money. And then finally, let's get real about gondolas. Now, do you know what? I find it really hard to recommend that you do a gondola other than to be able to say that you've done it. Now, that's probably the reason I did do it thinking about it. It's just because I wanted to be able to say I did it. It's €80 for about 30 to 40 minutes, so they say, but if I look at the first picture and the last picture that I took on our gondola ride, it was 19 minutes. So I feel a little bit ripped off, so maybe I'm a little bit biased here. I do think if you want to be able to say you've done it, it's worth it. If you're actually doing it to enjoy it, I'm not sure it's worth the money, and €80 could definitely be spent better elsewhere. I think one of the things I really struggled with before I left for Venice was deciding on focal length, which was why I took the 16-55mm as my main lens. Now, having been and come back, I do think I actually lucked out taking that lens because I found myself shooting at the extremes of that lens all of the time. Venice is really small and compact, so the 16mm wide angle is really helpful when you're trying to get in architecture because there's so many times where you just can't back up far enough. Claire with the X100V and the 23mm, so 35mm full frame lens, was just too close at times to frame things that she wanted. At the other end, I also found myself shooting 55mm a lot in an area I didn't think I would. So there's lots of times that you're going to be walking around Venice and you're going to see little bridges and little canals and you're going to want to take pictures down them, and I found that I actually wanted the compression that the zoom lens gave me. So I think for the first time ever, my advice for a trip might actually be to take a zoom, because if I'd taken two prime lenses, I'd have been forever swapping. If I was taking two primes, I would go for a pretty extreme wide angle and maybe a 50mm. So from a Fuji point of view, I'd probably go for the 16mm maybe f1.4 along with a 33mm f1.4. That would probably be the two lenses I chose. Now my biggest standout piece of advice for Venice, and it's going to sound a little bit mean, is go and get lost. Yeah, you heard that, go get lost. Honestly, I do think that's probably the biggest charm of Venice, is the fact that the entire island looks as good as the main attractions. You can go off-piste down all these little tiny like back alleys and streets and take some of the best pictures you've ever taken. Venice is honestly stunning throughout, and I said to Claire when we returned from Venice that I actually want to go again now just to do exactly that. Just to wake up in the morning, pick up my camera, have a coffee, and then just go and get lost. Take pictures and enjoy the day. Probably the most beautiful place I've ever been. And do you know what else is beautiful? Lake Como and Milan, and they are just an hour away from Venice, and if you want to check them out, luckily for you, I've got 2 videos on them here. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe.